Hello. So today, good. Today, I thought I'd talk about a topic as it is May in New Zealand. At least this happened in the past. I don't even know if they're still doing it because I haven't heard mention of it. But May was considered New Zealand Music Month, a month in which New Zealand music was played more, or I don't know exactly how what they did to promote it. When you live in a country, a small country like New Zealand, part of the Anglosphere, it is quite easy to become overshadowed, dominated by other cultural powerhouses within the English speaking world. Um, so, if you looked at a list of the most popular, or, biggest selling, or what do you even call it, most successful movies, music releases, tours, TV shows, books, I would say that 90% of those would be overseas sourced products, art, what are you going to call it? Um, New Zealand, stuff doesn't get a look in because it's usually on a lower budget. Like a New Zealand movie, I guess you talk about Lord of the Rings, but that's not really a New Zealand movie. It had Hollywood movie studio backing, so the money came from America. The director was American. Sorry, was a New Zealander, Peter Jackson, and some of the actors were New Zealanders, and the location, but it wasn't. I don't think you can really technically call it a New Zealand movie because yeah, the production company, it was made by New Line Cinemas, which is an American company. All the money came from America. It wouldn't have been made without that money, or at least it wouldn't have been made to the quality of what you would expect for a major motion picture blockbuster type movie. So my point is that when things are from New Zealand, it's difficult for them to compete with the United Kingdom, North America, USA, Canada, even Australia. Um, and so the government has certain initiatives and funding and grants and support for New Zealand artists, filmmakers, TV show producers, musicians, writers. And they said, oh yes, May is going to be New Zealand Music Month, in which we will support and promote New Zealand music to a greater extent. But like I said, I haven't really heard much about that over the last few years. So I don't even know if it's still a thing. But I went through my collection to find some of the New Zealand music I own. And I do own quite a bit. I'm not going to talk about all of it. There's quite a lot more over there, but I'm not going to go through all of it. I kind of just picked out a few things that I thought were interesting or I would recommend in some way. Maybe. I hope I've got the ones I'd recommend. And maybe had some of them had some kind of overseas success. Some of them didn't. Some of them you probably never heard of. I'd say probably most of them you've never heard of. First one here is Split Ends. I'd say Split Ends were probably one of the most successful New Zealand acts, as in they had success outside New Zealand. Um, Being in New Zealand, it's hard to gauge how much success. So sometimes you think, oh, these guys, they were big in America, and then you're talking to American, they're like, who? What? New Zealand? Where's that? Split Ends was they started in the mid late 70s and went through to the early 80s, and they were the core of the band were the Finn brothers that were Neil and Tim Finn, and they wrote a lot of good songs. You look, this is a greatest hits collection with 2 discs, and if I guess again, this is me being a New Zealander and knowing the songs. You go through this, there are a lot of songs on here that you would just hear. They're kind of part of the popular consciousness, like I See Red and History Never Repeats, Dirty Creature, I Got You, 6 Months in a Leaky Boat. These were songs that you would hear regularly on radio, TV, you know, out and about. You just hear them, played in shops, things like that, even to this day. So I'd probably say Split Ends are one of, if not the biggest band that we produced Though, yeah, I guess there's probably a lot of, there could be a lot of debate over it. Crowded House, which was Neil Finn's band after that, they probably had more international success than that I think about it. Because I think they almost got to number one in America with Don't Dream It's Over. Then they got to number two. But anyway, they're a great band, got some great songs. Headless Chickens, Body Blow. Headless Chickens were a band that kind of started in the late 80s, had some success in the early 90s. I think they also had a bit of success in Australia. Not sure how much, but I think they're a pretty original sounding band. One of the problems with being in New Zealand is that there is a danger of being very derivative of the stuff that we hear coming out of America and Britain. And to avoid that is not always easy. But I think these guys made a pretty truly original sound. When you hear a Headless Chicken song, you know it's a Headless Chicken song. They started off a bit different and harsher. Then they got a female vocalist, Fiona Anderson. And she kind of gave them more of a pop edge, and they had some fairly successful songs like Cruise Control and Juice and Mr. Moon. These are all pretty good songs as well. Actually, I bought the second hand about a year ago, and I remember listening to it, putting it on and listening to it the first time. I was like shocked how many of the songs were songs that I already knew, that had been played obviously like on TV and radio when I was young. But yeah, it's a good album. Not all these I would say I'm a huge, massive fan of, but these are just kind of ones that have popularity and maybe some success. So this is the Exponents, also known as the Dance Exponents. They, I guess you just call them a rock band, pop rock band. So everyone my age, everyone was born in the 80s, or earlier, I'd say born in the 70s as well, knows these guys. They tour, or they used to tour every summer. Every summer you'd be guaranteed that the Exponents were going to do a tour of all the beach towns around New Zealand. But they've got a lot of songs that are kind of part of the popular consciousness. Why Does Love Do This To Me? Who Loves Who the Most? Victoria. Whatever Happened to Tracy. They're okay. Not my favorite band, to be honest, but they're okay. And they certainly have their place in New Zealand music history. The Feelers. These guys came out when I'm in my last year at high school, 98, late 90s. And they were played a lot. They were pushed a lot on radio. This was a time when radio was still important, And there's one particular song on this, Super System, which is also the same name as the album, that I really like that song. And still to this day, 25 years later, I still like this. The rest of the album, I could take or leave. It's got some okay songs. They went on to have success, but also make some truly horrible music. I really couldn't stand the Feelers after this album. Like to the point where I'd turn off the radio if I heard them come on. Just boring, I don't know, the worst kind of rock music you can imagine. Pluto, these guys had a lot of hype around them, I remember, in the early 2000s, around this album time. When did this come out? 2005? I thought it would have been later than that, but no, it was definitely later than that. Maybe it was. Anyway, they had a lot of hype around them. And they had some okay songs. I like the song Long White Cross. That's a good song. That kind of, what would you class them as? Kind of rock, alternative rock, post-rock, indie, mishmash. I remember I had a girlfriend who worked at a pub or a bar, and these guys were booked to play there. And they got like an audience of like 5 people. And I didn't go, but I remember my girlfriend telling me, this is an ex-girlfriend, telling me about it. I felt really sorry for them. But I guess that's part of being in a band, But they were relatively well known at this point. I knew the name Pluto. They'd been booked to play there. But anyway, okay, I'm taking a bit long going through this. D4, these guys were a garage rock. They were kind of around that garage rock revival period in the early 2000s with the Strokes, the Hives, the White Stripes, those kind of bands. And these guys kind of were on that though they'd been around before that. The guitarist in this band, Dion Palmer, went to my high school. He was in a punk band called Nothing at All in the mid-90s. And then he went on to form this band with, can't remember the guy, Jimmy, the vocalist. And this is a pretty good straight-ahead rock album. If you like that kind of garage rock punk sound, it's pretty good. And I think these guys had some overseas success. I think they had a major label release with their, was it 420? Was it 420? Wouldn't have been 420, would it? Maybe it was. Anyway, in the same similar vein, the Datsuns, similar time, similar sound, also had some overseas success, signed a major label. I think they're on Virgin Records, maybe. This is a pretty good album. Beck Runga. No, I'm not the biggest fan of this, but this album seemed to be huge in the mid-late 90s. And I think she had some overseas success. She's kind of like, a female singer-songwriter sound, which was kind of big at that time, wasn't it, in the late 90s? Alanis Morissette, Lisa Loeb, Sheryl Crow. She's got some nice songs, if you like that kind of thing. Don't know why I included it, actually. Concord Dawn, drum and bass duo. They're okay. Actually, I didn't really like drum and bass. I don't know why I included this. That song, Morning Light, that's okay. Their other single on this was Don't Tell Me with Tiki Tane from Salmonella Dub. But yeah, if you like drum and bass, apparently these guys were quite well regarded in the drum and bass scene overseas and stuff like that. So I think I'm putting my own personal feeling into that. So if you like drum and bass, you give these guys a listen. Garageland, these guys were a, how would you call them? In the vein of the Dunedin sound, from the early 80s, that kind of sound, like kind of indie jangle guitar, jangle pop rock, alternative rock. And this was 95, no, not 96, I think. And I liked these guys back then. I went to a few of their concerts when I was a kid. And this is a pretty solid album. Particularly like the song Finger Pops, Come Back. Not a bad album. This is Flying Nun. Flying Nun don't know if they still exist, were a label that kind of have a big part of New Zealand musical history. They were in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a lot of bands coming out of Dunedin, which is a very small city in the South Island, New Zealand, and they were on that record label called Flying Nun, put together by, was it Chris Knox? Or was Chris Knox just in one of the bands? I can't remember. But the Chills, or the Verlaines, or Straight Jacket Fits, some of these bands might ring a bell if you like that kind of thing. These guys are kind of in that vein and obviously on the same label as well, but obviously quite a bit later. This is, like I said, 1996. These guys, I think these guys were kind of underrated or before their time. Their big hit was Sophie, and that was just kind of like a pop hit. But they had kind of like a mixture of 80s synth keyboard together with rock sound. And I think they did this in the early 2000s. And I think if they had been like 5 or 10 years later, I think they would have been bigger, because that kind of 80s sound got more popularity later on, and it wasn't, I particularly like the singles on this, like Blowing Dirt, Place to Be, Green. They're like legitimately good songs, and they make really good use of the keyboard sound. They might still be around. I'm talking about them as though they're in the past tense. They might still exist, I'm not sure. But this is their first album, and it was a pretty good album. This is perhaps my favorite New Zealand album of all time. Shihad's Killjoy. Shihad started as a heavy metal band, and they gradually evolved to hard rock, alternative rock, and kind of they've stayed within that, but I'd say they've lost a lot of their metal edge from their early releases. This is from 94, and I think this is their best album. They had like, what is it, 94? 95. I think there was one before this, Churn. I don't know if Churn was an EP or an album, but there was Churn. Devolve. Anyway, from Churn through Killjoy, then was the Fish album. There's an album with blue cover with kind of fishes on it. Then General Electric and the Pacify album. That run of albums is pretty great. And then what was that? Oh, the one with the grasshopper the praying mantis on the front. What's that called? Love is the New Hate. That's pretty good as well. After that, I feel they were much more hit and miss. But they had a pretty good 10-year run there where they released some legitimately good music. Not good for New Zealand. I mean, good music. This album is fucking good. Really good. You Again, Bitter, Deb's Night Out. These are all great songs. I highly recommend this album. This and Churn. There's the lads. Supergroove. These guys felt like everywhere in the 90s. I think when I looked at the back of this album, it was like almost every song from this was released as a single or was played on the radio at least. They're kind of a mixture of funk rock, I guess. They got kind of like a horn section as well, but it doesn't overpower. I think it's used well. This is a classic album. And I'd say even back then, I didn't actually love them. But listening to now, I think, again, they kind of made some original sounding music. They weren't following a lot of trends. They sound quite a bit different. They had two vocalists. One of the vocalists was Shea Fu. You might have heard of him, maybe. Probably not, actually, if you're not from New Zealand. But yeah, I recommend this because it's different. It's not like what else was happening at that time. Last one, Day One. Day One are a hardcore metal hard, metallic hardcore. I won't say metalcore. They were before metalcore, I think. And the vocalist of this band was one of my good friends from high school, Mike. And this, I think, is a pretty solid album as well. There's not a bad song on it. Got great guitar work. The guitarist in this, the drum and bass album I mentioned before, said that I didn't like, the Concord Dawn. The guitarist is the same guy who's in Concord Dawn, Evan. But it's a great band. So this one might be hard to find. I think it's on Spotify, but it's worth a listen if you like hardcore metal. Anyway, something different. Thank you for watching.